Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish Prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Hey folks, welcome back to Through a Scottish Prism. It's been a week since we had our last wee chat, and here we are again. I'm talking to you today from Dubai. I was meant to be in Abu Dhabi, but I don't go there now till tomorrow. But so here I am to chat to you. It's been another week where we've got lots to discuss, and I'm joined. I should just say first right away, we were meant to be. One of my guests today was meant to be Colette Walker, leader of the ISP party, who unfortunately had an accident, a road accident, and had a car run over her foot, and she's actually in A&E and will be unable to join us. But hopefully we can get her back on the programme very, very soon. We want to have as many views from as many pro-independence people and parties as possible. But to help me today, I'm joined by Yvonne Ridley from down there on the borders.
Hi.
Hi, Yvonne, my dear friend. How are you?
Very well. Tip top.
Good. You're looking in fine fettle. You're looking a happy bunny.
Yes, everything's wonderful.
Good week. And we've, of course, also got to join us. I have got from there up in Clickmanager, our Eva Comrie.
Hi, Roddy. Hi, Yvonne. It's been a big, very positive week for me. I'd like to say a big thank you to the staff at the Westmark Clinic in Glasgow because they provided me with a new socket for my bionic foot this week, and I no longer self-identify as a pogo stick, and I'm walking on air. So happy days indeed.
Excellent. Well, I'm sorry, we're also meant to have our friend Phil Boswell from Seoul, but unfortunately he has been delayed. He may join us, we don't know. We'd like his input. We don't know if we're going to get angry Phil or absent Phil today, so we shall see, but I am sure we can soldier on, ladies. It has been quite a week, Yvonne, but the highlight, I suppose, the big one of the day was fantastic performance by our ALPA MPs in Westminster, particularly Neil Hanvey. He asked the question that so many of us in Scotland want answered, and he asked the Prime Minister, is Scotland a colony, a British colony, or are we an equal partner?
Neil Hanvey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will know that it's Scotland's energy resources that feed corporate profits and keep His Majesty's Treasury pumped full of cash to the tune of £8 billion in the last 9 months alone. In return, candidates in the summer Tory leadership contest tried to outdo each other in their contempt and hostility to Scotland's democracy. So without falling back on the "you've had your vote" trope, can the Prime Minister tell me, is Scotland in a voluntary and respectful union of equals as claimed in 2014, or are we hostages in a territorial British colony?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what people across Scotland rightly want to see is both their governments working constructively together to improve their lives. That's what we will do on this side of the House. And part of that is actually supporting Scottish energy producers, which he is right, have a vital role to play in enabling our transition to net zero and improving our energy security. And those Scottish companies will have our full support.
Now, it brought gasps from the SNP MPs, and it brought absolute shivering from the unionists. It was quite an intervention, and of course he didn't get the answer. He didn't get an answer at all.
No, he really rattled Rishi Sunak. Old Bambi Eyes there was looked more like a rabbit trapped in the headlights as Neil put his question forward. It was absolutely amazing reaction from Sunak, who likes to come over as being Mr. Nice Guy, gentle and polished. But this really rattled him, and it was quite interesting to see because I've not seen him lose it the way he did. I don't know, there must be some sort of trigger that Neil manages to do in Westminster, because I've not, it wasn't quite on the scale of the Speaker meltdown. But Rishi Sunak, as I say, old Bambi Eyes, really was thrown by the question, which makes me think that Neil really hit home.
Oh, for sure. But the point was, Eva, that Sunak didn't answer it. He came out with just some standard, as I wrote about in my blog article this week. And Hoyle, the speaker, didn't interject and say, Prime Minister, could you answer the question? It's a load of nonsense. He was talking about companies in Scotland and this, that, and the next thing, and we'll support them and we will work closely with the Scottish government. But very good. Answer the question. They didn't want to answer it because telling the truth or telling a lie was going to trip them up.
Well, yes, indeed. And it's abundantly clear, as Yvonne said, that Neil Hanvey's great question and his style of delivery very much touched a nerve, a raw nerve, on the Prime Minister, but it also touched the nerves of the SNP because some of their MPs were most disgruntled that this position had been put. They were insulted at the very suggestion that Scotland might be a colony. So, Roddy, you know that I like to read and I recommend some good books and I like history and I'm a great fan of the comprehensive education. So again, here's some education for my good friend Pete Wishart and his pals in the SNP. There's a bit of geography in here and a bit of history. This is from the website of the National Trust for Scotland, and it's about a place near Ardersier called Fort George. And it's an item called a statement of significance in relation to Fort George and what Fort George means. Fort George, the finest example of 18th century military engineering in the British Isles. The artillery fort was begun by the government forces of George II in 1747 in the aftermath of the 1745 Jacobite uprising as they tried to enforce order in the Scottish Highlands. So there you have it, proof positive of active army bases and military installations installed in Scotland by the British government to quell the rebellion within Scotland. If that is not the beginning of the definition of a colony, what is?
Oh, well, absolutely. Yvonne, Eva's touched on our friend Pete Wishart, who I've invited onto this show on several occasions to debate these things, and that is still an open invitation. He got very upset about it. How dare we call it Scotland? You'll cost us independence. You can't go in the doors and tell the people of Scotland they're living in a colony. You will cost us independence. So I tweeted to him and said, well, if we're not a colony, why do we have to ask our equal partner for permission to hold a referendum? Why do we not choose who can emigrate in here and who cannot? Why are we not in the EU if we're not a colony? We voted to remain in the EU. Why are we out if we're not a colony? He didn't reply, of course, but it's true.
Well, I have yet to meet Angry Pete. I first heard about him when I was involved in a little spat on Twitter, and I went to look him up because he'd been mentioned to me by somebody else. And I couldn't look him up because I'd been blocked. And I thought, well, I don't even know who you are. And then I had to Google him and find out he's some sort of aging folk singer or some such thing and turned politician. And I would love to meet him personally. He's obviously a man burdened greatly by his own self-importance. Because I do get sort of photoshops of his rants, and he does seem to be rather an amusing, entertaining character. So he should come on to Prism, and he's I think he's the one who wanted the deputy speaker's job.
Correct.
A couple or so years ago, and he really seems to have been seduced by all the trappings and theatre that go down in the House of Commons. But if he is watching this, and I apparently he does monitor all things Alapa. Pete, don't be shy. Come on board.
I wish he would, but that would take courage, and it's something that's very lacking in that man. He boasts, Eva, about being 21 years down there. And you say, well, what have you done in the 21 years to advance our cause? Again, he doesn't reply. He blocks. He's got more pro-independence people blocked than are in the Yes movement. That's incredible.
But isn't that the problem with the SNP in Westminster and also in Holyrood? That they boast about their longevity, and we've had the First Minister talking about the number of British Prime Ministers that she claims to have seen off. And I think that what we would take out of that is that thus far, the new SNP have actually failed in their principal mission, because their principal mission is obviously A, to gain independence, and B, to further all Scottish interests. So in relation to gaining independence, clearly they understand that we're a colony, and that's why they've gone to the Supreme Court with a begging bowl, because were we not a colony, we would have had a referendum by now. We might even have had a supermajority to enable us to head towards a form of UDI. We could have an application made to the UN. There's a whole lot of stuff that we could have done if we had SNP MPs and MSPs who were spine full as opposed to spine less. And I think that we see the evidence of this unfolding, unfortunately, practically daily now, where what's happening is it's not Scotland's interests that are being promoted by the SNP at Westminster, it's the interests of the SNP that are being promoted. We saw that in some of the debates this week. What we've also seen is, while we're waiting for the decision of the Supreme Court, in essence, all SNP elected reps are sitting on their hands or they're biting their nails. What they're not doing is driving forward any multifaceted agenda or process directed towards attaining independence. All eggs are in one basket. And for a political party and government that claims to seek independence to actually hand the powers of that over to the Supreme Court in London seems to me to be akin to shooting off both feet. So I would like to see some real action, the fulfilment of the promise that Kenny McCaskill spoke about the other day, made by Nicola in, was it January 2020? We will have
31st.
No convention. Yep. There is no reason why the Constitutional Convention shouldn't happen and happen now. There's plenty of time for her to get that done. She could have that up and running. It could meet half a dozen times before Christmas. They could be meeting regularly in advance of the Supreme Court decision to plot the path towards independence. That this has not been done is yet another broken promise, and it's why they get the accusation levelled at them that they are just riding the gravy train, or as one of their aides put it, the gravy bus. They won't do. And the people of Scotland are waking up to that. More and more we in Alba are getting messages of support from people that you wouldn't believe had come our way, having been dyed in the wool, red hot SNP supporters, even through last year and earlier this year. Because people understand that the SNP's priority just now doesn't seem to be anything other than promoting their longevity and do some more record breaking, whether that's front page news on the National or another I can exclusively reveal will remain to be seen.
Yeah, it's Eva's right, Yvonne. The Constitutional Convention could be there tomorrow, but that would mean working with the Alapa Party, with the ISP, why we wanted Colette on here today, with the Yes movement, with all under one banner. And Nicola's not for working with other pro-independence parties or organisations, but she did say, I will work and try and have a great relationship with the Prime Minister Sunak. She's wanting to have a relationship with a Tory Prime Minister in England at Westminster, but she doesn't want to have anything to do with pro-independence parties or people. It is a funny position for a so-called pro-independence movement.
Yes, I mean, Sturgeon has criticised and ridiculed the MPs that have come after Cameron, the likes of, Theresa May, Boris Johnson, Rishi Sunak, and Liz Truss. Nearly forgot about her.
Remember her?
And she's ridiculed them all. And I just think, yeah, you can stand up and say, I've got rid of all of these people, but what have you done? Alex Salmond, with half a dozen SNP MPs, got us a referendum in 2014.
Yeah.
He has MPs coming out of her ears, and as I say, all of these foolish prime ministers, but she hasn't been able to get us a referendum so far. And so, they're not that stupid, are they, Nicola? Because they're the ones who are running circles around her. I mean, with Liz Truss being elected on a platform from the Tory faithful by saying, oh, I'll just ignore the First Minister. And it was the one thing that she kept her word on. And she did ignore Sturgeon during her brief tenure in number 10. Mm-hmm. Rishi Sunak is quite a different character, and I fancy that he will outmaneuver Sturgeon. And
I don't think that's very difficult to do, Yvonne.
Well, no amount of stroking his arm, Blackford style, is going to outwit him. He is determined to keep the union together, and he does not want to be known as the British Prime Minister who lost the union.
None of them do.
Unfortunately, Sturgeon doesn't have the wit or the imagination to deliver what Alex Salmond delivered with half a dozen MPs.
But it's not only what he did deliver, Eva. Alex already given her a plan on a plate. He's told her what she could do, and it's a simple yet effective. As she pointed out, England's distress is Scotland's opportunity. The union has never been in more trouble. They're on their knees. We've got inflation. We've got high interest rates. We've got unemployment coming along. We've got and we'll talk about it later, rolling blackouts coming our way. This is the time to strike.
Absolutely. Love him or hate him, it is universally acknowledged worldwide that Alex Salmond was the greatest thing to ever happen to Scottish independence.
Yeah.
So, although Nicola clearly detests the man more than she detests the Tories, and she'll work with the Tories and she'll work with the Greens and she'll work with everybody except Alba, she would be well advised to take his advice because it is sage, it is reliable, and it is likely to work. More likely to work than any of the advice she'll get either from those around her or inside her own head. His issue in relation to using Parnell tactics is well recognised and certainly would be something I'd be delighted to see the SNP utilise. It only takes one of them at every sitting in Westminster, or at least at every Prime Minister's questions there, to stand up, make a point of order and do a bit of demonstrating in relation to what Scotland's needs and interests actually are, and they could bring the place to a standstill, make themselves nuisances constantly. That's what they should be doing, as opposed to a wee daft debate the other day where there was however many of them in the House talking about the merits of independence. We know about the merits of independence. What Nicola needs to do is listen to Alec about the route towards achieving independence. Mm-hmm. There's no point in us sitting here saying, I was a member of the SNP for 40 years and all that time I fought for independence, if at the end of it, you don't achieve it. And I certainly, we've said this so many times before, it is so desperately needed these days. 2014 was a walk in the park compared to what 2022 is and what 2023 looks like it's going to become for so many people. We've said this before, you look from pig to man and man to pig, etc. But look at the scenes unfolding in Westminster, and our SNP MPs who are there are pitiful in the context of attempting to achieve anything for Scotland. There's a couple of admirable exceptions, but most of them really need to get out of there and get back up the road and start fighting for independence in a Scottish context and look at these things, as you say, Roddy, through a Scottish prism, as opposed to thinking that they're down there with the big boys in Westminster, the mother of all parliaments, making a name for themselves. They're down there to take us out, not settle in.
No, correct. You're talking about Parnell tactics. Well, this week, it wasn't a Parnell tactic, but we spoke about it earlier. Neil certainly threw a hand grenade in, and it's had reverberations, Yvonne, up in Scotland. People have looked up and gone, you know what? He's right, the Billy Connolly moment. And that is what we have to do. He was right. We've got to disrupt. We've got to ask the killer questions. We've got to make it as uncomfortable as possible for those down in London who think they can just stand in our throat.
Well, I was just thinking before, if we had got the referendum through in 2014, I think I'm very confident that we would be sitting relatively secure now. We wouldn't be lying awake, worried about energy bills. In fact, we'd probably be more concerned at the tens of thousands of English refugees wanting to come into Scotland to escape the nightmare that is Westminster. But unfortunately, we didn't get that yes vote through. And we are where we are now, hanging on Nicola Sturgeon's attempt to get a referendum through an English court. We've got more chance of seeing the Pope's privates than that happening. And, I would love to be wrong. I would love to be able to turn around and say, yay, Nicola Sturgeon, the woman who delivered a referendum. But all I can see at the moment when I look at Holyrood is Nicola Sturgeon desperately clinging on to a baby box. And that is about her only achievement. And then I just found out in last week's Prism that really wasn't her achievement anyway. So, Nicola, for God's sake, what is your legacy going to be? How will history judge you? Because at the moment you have delivered nothing. You fractured your party. The one good thing from that is the creation of the Alba Party. And it's not that our members are better than the SNP. It just means that we're broadening the whole independent movement and thinking out of the box. And thankfully, we've got Alex Salmond, a leader who is known for his strategy, his incisiveness, and being able to read the runes. And so, in some ways, I do actually feel very sorry for Sturgeon, the first female First Minister, and she's, at the moment, she's got nothing to show for it, other than a couple of dodgy ferry contracts and other failed policies.
She's wanting to do business with the Tories. She wants to have a relationship. This week we heard, Eva, that our Suella Braverman, I never thought she'd come back Priti Patel, all is forgiven. But she's now looking at other countries, I believe Peru. Now, we got Paddington from Peru. She's now wanting to send people to Rwanda and Peru. Why would you want to do business with people like that? You just want to get to hell as far away from them as you can. Well,
it's the coaching horses through human rights as well, isn't it? And, one of the countries that Suella was looking at was Belize. And I think Belize knocked them back and said, this is not a humane practice. So to be told that by a British colony actually says it all. You don't want to do business with the Tories. There are no circumstances within which we should. But you can see that process developing because, and I think only because, the SNP are so very cosy in Westminster. They want to soak into a Tory government. I don't know what they think it's going to get them in the long run, other than prolong their own careers without achieving independence.
Yeah.
And I think, in terms of Suella Braverman and what she may or may not bring to the table, there is nothing good there. There is nothing positive. There is nothing warm about her behaviour, her policies, her attitudes, her motivation. It is all negative and, quite frankly, at times utterly barbaric. What we should have is an independent Scotland where we actively encourage immigration. We need people to come to live in Scotland. Scotland is becoming, in effect, depopulated. The statistics are awful, but in terms of rural areas, especially the islands, we know there are issues there in relation to housing, the cost of housing. We know there are some issues affecting education. We know the population is ageing. We know that we need young people to look after us as we get older, and we don't have that within our own communities. We need people to come here. We need them to stay here. And we need to be able to write our own policies, not be dependent on Westminster in relation to whether folk can come here as seasonal workers or whether they can come here at all. I wouldn't be the slightest bit surprised if staffing issues, for example, in farming and certainly in the NHS, arise from the repercussions of Brexit and the like, and from the immigration policies imposed upon us by Westminster. So we've got the worst of all worlds at the moment.
But we're not a colony. We're not a colony.
We're not a colony. No, we're not a colony. We do not have the powers to recover from any of the effects of the policies imposed upon us by Westminster.
Yeah, we're imperial masters.
We hear it all the time. If we had independence, we could do X, Y, and Z. Yeah, we could. That's why we want independence. So how do we get there, Nicola? Because we're not getting there this year, and we're not going to be any nearer it next year, because that referendum that she promised will happen next year is looking increasingly less likely to take place.
Yeah, anytime she's talking about, there's no magic bullets or quick routes. We've got to do this properly. All excuses. Last week, Yvonne, we were talking here very much about the rebellion within the SNP ranks over the GRR first reading. And it was a huge rebellion, and I think probably going to get larger. But what's come out this week, we noticed, is that the reason there was a 3-line whip on the SNP was that it was part of the Greens' the demands when they come in to be in coalition with the SNP, that there would be a 3-line whip on anything to do with GRR. Is this the tail wagging the dog?
It is. But I would, there's two ways of looking at this. What the Greens, the Scottish Greens, which are quite different in makeup to the English Greens, who are nice and cuddly. But what this shows is that you don't need a whacking great majority to have an impact. And as small a presence as the Greens have in Holyrood, it's just enough to give the SNP the majority it needs to get through its legislation for the term. So obviously the Greens have put their boot on Nicola Sturgeon's neck and said, no compromise, this is a red line, GRA reforms must go through or else. And so because of that, you've got to whip all of your MSPs. Now this shows the power that a small party can have. And I'm saying that for those who tune into Prism and say, oh, what's the point of voting Alipur? They can't make that much of an impact. Well, actually, what we saw with the GRA shows just what an impact a small presence can have in Holyrood. Neil Hanvey has shown us what one man can do in Westminster. So don't be deterred. If you see Alipur on your voters list for whether it's council, Holyrood or Westminster, put your vote with the party, because great things can be achieved or even bad things when you look at the GRA. But, you know, things can be achieved by a tiny minority. And the Scottish Greens have their teeth sunk into Sturgeon and any resistance she shows, and they crunch back at her. And of course, now she's in this dilemma where she's just had the biggest rebellion in the history of the SNP through her bonkers GRA reforms. And what is she going to do in the future? Because if she doesn't do as the Greens tell her, she will lose her majority in Holyrood. But she's in danger of losing that anyway at the hands of her own party. So she's put herself in a ridiculous position. And I would say one word to Nicola, and that's Schadenfreude. Because if she had not been so arrogant as to tell people vote 1 and 2 SNP, if she just conceded vote 1 SNP, vote 2 Alipur, she would have had, or ISP as well, she would have had a majority through independence-minded parties. And the Scottish Greens are not independence-minded. Their priority is appeasing and pleasing this tiny group of trans activists. And then their next thing is the environment. They're not committed to independence the way that we are in Alipur, that the ISP is, and so Sturgeon, if she had been truly clever and she had looked forward instead of trying to settle old scores, she would have been sitting pretty by now. And the GRA wouldn't even be a flaming issue, because we'd all be working hard now for delivering a referendum.
I mean, I've heard through, I mean, I was in the SNP for a long time, like yourselves there, Eva. I've heard from some contacts. There are another 4 or 5 people on the second reading I'm hearing who are about to, you know, they've got their courage from those brave 9 that stepped forward. But as Yvonne says, she's put herself in this position all by herself. She's shown a total lack of political nous. You know, whatever you say, go back to Alec. Alec, I mean, is a strategist extraordinaire. But she has shown with the Greens, with how she's handling Westminster and how she's handling ferries and God knows what else, she doesn't actually have a strategic thought in her brain. And she doesn't seem to be surrounded by people who are strategic thinkers.
Unfortunately, it looks more and more like it's all spin and very little substance.
Yeah.
And I can actually think of very few things in life worse than being beholden to the likes of Patrick Harvey and Lorna Slater. Because the hard fact of the matter is that those SNP MSPs who were whipped as the result of the actions and the desires and the demands of Harvey and Slater. So the Greens control the SNP government. That's what it is. And Miss Sturgeon has lost control because those 7 who voted against and the 2 who abstained have not so far been disciplined. Are they going to be disciplined? Because if they're not, then that whip is utterly meaningless. And the fact that they've not been disciplined, I would suggest, tends to support the view that there are very many others that do not agree with the policy, particularly in relation to the self-ID aspects and the reducing of the age. So I think time will tell. There will be a few more brave souls who come forward. I hope that they do. And I hope that those who have misgivings but have voted as required thus far will one day have the courage of the convictions which they really do have if they listen to the electorate and come round and do what the general public massively, massively want once they know what this self-ID actually involves. and get short of this bill and actually call the bluff of the Greens and tell them to go and get knotted. Because they really have no place in the government of this country. They were elected with very few votes here and there, and they're representative not of the vast majority of the country who want to see independence as the priority, and these other things can be left till later on if required, but they're certainly not welcome policies at the moment.
If you look at politics, Yvonne, I've forgotten his age, Geoffrey Howe, who was the Chancellor for Thatcher, his resignation effectively triggered the end of Mrs. Thatcher. Rishi Sunak resigning as the Chancellor saw off our Boris, and having an idiot as a Chancellor saw Liz Truss off. Now, fortunately for Nicola Sturgeon, we know that Kate Holmes is a devout Christian, and she is one of the ones that signed a letter back in 2019 saying that she was opposed to this and uncomfortable and it should be delayed till there was, more consensus. Now, she's been on maternity leave. That rule would apply in Scotland. If she comes back for the second reading and she votes and resigns, and resigns from the Chancellor's job, it suddenly puts our Nicola's jacket on a sugary peg, does it not?
Absolutely. As I say, when I was talking before about strategy, it's all about reading the game weeks, months, if not years in advance. And what you have with Alex Salmond is a first-class chess player. It's like watching Bobby Fischer playing a game. But with Sturgeon, it's like watching Bart Simpson playing checkers. She's not reading this very well at all. And I think that she's suddenly seen that she could end up jumping before she's pushed. So there is a matter of urgency in the air in Holyrood now to do with these HRA reforms. And there's 5 stages, and I don't think they'll get past the 3rd stage. I think the whole thing will implode.
And moving on to another topic, Eva, we've spent a lot of time on here talking about energy and what's going down in the cost of energy and why we produce so much renewables and yet our electricity is priced on international gas price, etc., etc. We've been told to expect rolling blackouts in Scotland. We produce enough to give England a quarter of their needs and more, which they then sell in the open market. And yet Scotland is going to suffer rolling blackouts. And what are our government doing about it? Nothing.
Well, Roddy, you and I remember the 70s, and we remember events like the dustman strike and power cuts and the 3-day week and the telly going off at 10:30 and what have you. Little did we think that 50 years later we would be actually contemplating reliving some of that stuff.
Yeah.
So for everybody who is hungry or cold, who has a blackout, who's disconnected, who can't feed themselves and who can't heat themselves this winter, lay the blame fairly and squarely at the front door of Bute House. Absolutely. The great reverse wind auction sell out, I should say, is really a very, very telling episode in Scottish political history. When they sold off the wind, they created a position whereby there was a maximum bid as opposed to a minimum bid. It was a sellout. It was an utter disgrace. And I would imagine that in many countries of the world, if you had politicians who were actually permitting assets to be sold at an undervalue, which is what this was, there would be consequences. And those consequences might well include charges of, malfeasance in public office, if we want to call it that. So there is a scandal there waiting to be properly uncovered and publicised. But the bigger scandal is the one that we go back to every time, and it is, Why are we beholden to Westminster for any of this? Why are politicians in London deciding whether or not we can afford to pay our electricity or our gas bills? It's happening because there's a lack of political will on the part of those who were elected to take us out of that union. And so it's perfectly obvious that there are no SNP politicians, whether in Westminster, Holyrood, or in local authorities around the country, who are using food banks, but they are all talking about funding food banks, and they're talking about creating warm banks so that people who cannot heat their homes can go and sit in a library or a school or a town hall so as not to freeze. How utterly ridiculous is that? You know, what they should be doing is bring back all the MPs to Scotland and, you know, man a border and say to folk who want to come to Scotland, we're looking at independence very, very carefully, and we are absolutely laser focused on achieving the independence that Scotland so desperately needs, and work out how to get it done, rather than sit and worry about whether or not people are going to freeze to death and how can you avoid that happening. It's just cowardice, actually, is the word.
Yeah, that goes back to this issue of the Constitutional Convention. She should withdraw her MPs and she should tell us to not get it sorted. Because the other thing, Yvonne, BP announced, was it BP? I'm just checking my notes, that the revenue, or just the revenues from the North Sea in the first 9 months of this year gave the Treasury a windfall of 8 billion, 4 times up on last year. Now, if they're getting that in 9 months, you know, take to 12, let's call it 12 billion for the year. If I was Sturgeon, I'd be demanding some of that to give, to reduce the bills in Scotland.
As I said before, imagine if there hadn't been the vow and project fear, and that we were living in an independent Scotland now. From 2014, we're now, you know, we'd be 8 years down the line. We'd very likely have our own currency, our own emergency funds, to deal with a looming recession. We wouldn't have flogged off the energies at a bargain basement price. And I think that we would be in a much better position now to deal with the recession that is going to sweep the world, because it's happening all over. And we would be in a much stronger position. But what I would say to people is, let's get angry. The people who've shown us the way right in front of our eyes, and for some reason we haven't noticed it, are the people who promote solidarity and unity. And I'm talking about the trade unions. Yeah. They're the RMT, have just suspended their strike action because the rail companies are now realizing something very basic. You can't operate without a workforce. And if the workers go on strike, then you can't operate at all. So they've gone back to the table, cap in hand to the RMT, and they're wanting to resolve this now. This is something that we should be looking at as an independence movement, going to all of the unions and hold a general strike in Scotland until we get what we want, which is independence. And that is how you do it, not going cap in hand to a bloody English court that's going to stick 2 fingers up at the end of the day. And this is what we need to do. We need to get angry, because there is just heartache and heartbreak waiting down the road after all these years under Tory rule. And people are going to die this winter. If they're not dying of starvation, they're going to die of hypothermia. This is the 21st century. It should not be happening. We need to get angry. We need to really grasp the nettle and go for independence. And don't ask for it, demand it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I saw Mick Lynch on the television talking about we have to win this. They're talking almost the way that NATO are talking about the Ukrainian war, and what Mick's saying is we can't lose this, and we have to win every dispute, and we need unity, and that's what we need in Scotland as well. We need unity of purpose, because Eva, I mean, you notice the interest rates have creeped up again. We're now talking about 3%, and the average people say, 3% is not a lot. I mean, I pay 12 or 15% on my credit card. What they don't realise is that's the base rate. And at nothing you were paying, when it was at 0%, you were paying 12% of your credit card. When it goes to 3, these shysters will move in. Now, it's going to increase the cost of borrowing for business. It's going to increase the cost of everything. Your mortgage, everything is going to go up in price. And still, they're refusing to give decent wages to people. Anarchy is just around the corner.
Well, I don't think anarchy is just around the corner in Scotland, because it seems to take the Scottish people far too long to waken up to reality. And I really wish that they were better informed and better educated about what does lie ahead. In the real world, the issues in relation to inflation and interest rates will bite dramatically, even more than they already are. Food inflation is well into double figures. So we're not seeing just shelves that are at times bare. We're seeing produce that we actually are beginning to not be able to afford to buy. And therefore, food bank usage is going up. But food banks are running out of food because people are not donating to them the way they used to, because they can't afford to. So it's not, so the people that would have been able to donate in the past are now struggling themselves. And so there is, really quite a horrible reach in terms of the impact of rising prices across the board, whether it is your mortgage is becoming too high or your fuel costs or whatever it is. But where there are serious problems for Scotland actually is that if you look at the areas of responsibility of Scottish Government ministers, there is not one department that functions competently the way that it should. And it pains me to say this, but there are problems in every area of Scottish public life. We know that the NHS is struggling very badly, especially in relation to accident and emergency. And by no stretch of the imagination is this a criticism of the staff. This is my criticism of successive cabinet secretaries for health, including the current incumbent. They took their eye off the ball, and they've kept it off the ball for so long that there are areas of crisis practically everywhere in relation to staff shortages, waiting times, operations, etc., etc. We know there are problems within the police force, there are horrendous issues in education, and in respect of the justice system, dreadful figures in terms of delays in prosecutions or statistics where, for example, violence against women and girls rarely leads to a successful prosecution within a reasonably short period of time. Everything appears to be doing very, very badly, and this is all on Miss Sturgeon's watch. She has got to get her government whipped into real action. Otherwise, the very, very, very depressing times lie ahead. Too much want and too many demands on a limited budget. And all of these things can be best addressed with independence, which is why that should be top of her agenda every minute and every waking hour.
Exactly. Yeah. But as we discussed last week, her problem is her whips are not up to the job, or they wouldn't have had the rebellion that they had. And that is the problem. Too many, shall we say, incompetence. Nearly used a bad word there, Yvonne. That would have been wrong. But on this poverty and everything that's going wrong, one of the things that's been going on in Glasgow is this heartbreaking sight of people turning up to get fed every day under the Highlanders umbrella, and they're desperate for premises, and they've been offered somewhere that was totally unsuitable. But Glasgow, my city of birth, we know there's got to be suitable buildings somewhere in the town centre where we can get these people in and give them a warm meal and give them a bit of heat. Surely to God, the SNP, local council and government can get together and get that sorted. It's not difficult.
No, not at all. Church halls, churches, They're in abundance in Scotland, and it would be easy enough to do that. And of course, it all goes back to independence. In an independent Scotland, we'd still have an armed forces, but they could be used for good. They could be used at the moment for running soup kitchens, for providing food for the needy and the hungry. You know, we could deploy them in the same way that the UN peacekeeping forces go overseas and into areas where there's a humanitarian crisis. It all goes back to independence. And as long as Nicola Sturgeon is belly dancing to Downing Street's tune, they are going to own her, set her up to fail, and that is exactly what's happening. She would actually look good in an independent Scotland, because then we would be in control of our borders, in control of our currency and the banks, and we would be the authors of our good fortune in an independent Scotland. But at the moment, we're like the organ grinder's monkey. It's awful.
I don't share your enthusiasm that she'd be doing well. She doesn't fill me with any kind of confidence. Everything she just turns to shit. It really does. Everything is in a mess. But there are people, I believe, that could sort that out. Time's rattling on as always. I'd like to go into something I need you to explain to the viewers, Eva. I noticed you were covering it on social media, and I'm totally confused. And this is about the chap with the knife, the flasher, who went to court twice in the one day to the same sheriff and the same PF, Procurator Fiscal, once as a man and once as a woman. Tell me, how can that happen? Well, why did it happen? And surely there's something not right there.
Can I say a wee thing there about Homeless Project Scotland that you were talking about there, though, Roddy? They're a registered charity, so they're able to be found. They have a website, homelessprojectscotland.org. They also, in addition to feeding 300 people a night now under the Hielanman's umbrella, they also run a 24-hour homeless telephone helpline. So it's well worth doing a bit of research and supporting their position for permanent premises.
I hope to get them on here one day.
Turning to the question of the person who appeared in court, the person was on two different summonses, and one of them, his name I think was Alan, and the other one, his name was Alana. I'll probably get into trouble now for saying his. So they appeared in court with these two summonses, and the sheriff and the Procurator Fiscal referred to the person throughout as being female and used she, her pronouns. And this, I think, was a case of self-identification. But self-identification is not the law.
Not yet.
So this person was being referred to as she, I think, as a matter of personal choice. In effect, it's enforced speech, enforced beliefs, enforced pronouns, and a sheriff and a fiscal are complying with it. I don't think that they need to. I think it is highly embarrassing. It makes a laughingstock of Scotland once more, and it's a set of circumstances that beggars belief. But the position appears to be that the second set of offences, where the person was charged as female, occurred after they had decided to self-identify and begin transitioning. So they will claim that they have the protected characteristic of gender reassignment on the basis that they have embarked upon a process of gender reassignment. So that's what I think.
It's an absolute nonsense. There's another case, Yvonne, in Norway. I don't know if you saw this. And another reason I was hoping Colette was going to be on here, Colette Walker, who is, of course, registered blind, has an autistic son who's non-verbal, etc. And she's a genuinely disabled person with a disabled child. There's a guy in Norway whose name, let's see if I've got it here, who Jean Victoria Alme, age 53, who identifies as disabled woman and spends most of his time in a wheelchair. He's not. And you yourself as well, Eva, someone who has got a disability. I found it quite insulting today in Holyrood when the First Minister was talking about people who identify as disabled. You don't identify as disabled. You're either disabled or you're not disabled. There's too much of this nonsense going on.
Well, I've decided to identify as Scotland's First Minister. So I'll be coming to Bute House tomorrow to take up my role, and that's my new self-identity. So push off, Nicola, and move out, because I am the new FM, and that's what I'm self-identifying as.
Oh, well, I'm going to self-identify as the Justice Minister. Oh, happy days. It is terribly worrying times that we're living in, Eva. We're no nearer to independence than we were on the 19th of September 2014. And no matter how many times we offer our hand out and we offer alternative routes and ways to do it, they seem to be caught in the headlights, not wanting to move forward. How do we change that?
It's all terribly embarrassing, actually. I don't know if you saw during the week when Ian Blackford was on his feet in Westminster. He was talking about when Scotland becomes independent, as if it's an inevitability. But we know that the dial hasn't really altered very much in the context of opinion polls, etc., because people want to see a campaign that's up and running with a determined drive towards independence. And that's what boosts the vote. It's what boosts support. But you need to take the people with you, and you can only take the people with you towards independence if those who are in charge of the campaign are enthusiastic, positive, driven, and express a degree of vitality and urgency and confidence. And unfortunately, these attributes currently do not seem to be shared by the leadership of the Scottish Government, or indeed the leadership of the SNP at Westminster. Instead, you see folk who look bored, moribund, fed up, and they talk in terms of, well, this is going to happen one day, without actually doing anything active to promote independence, other than saying, "Que sera, sera." So, yes, it's depressing. The way to move forwards is for Nicola Sturgeon to accept Alex's advice. And if she will not do that, then the rest of the movement will carry on doing what we're doing. We will work positively in Alba through wee Alba book events and the like, in the campaign at the Glasgow Lynn by-election, which is in a couple of weeks' time, and in the campaign for the Lynn by-election, which is in December. And what we're saying there is, here are positive Alba policies. We support independence. We talk about several different ways to get there, including the matters that we've already discussed. We talk about the rights and responsibilities of politicians to protect and defend the rights of women and girls particularly. And that is on the doorsteps a very live issue just now in these by-elections and generally. So we in Alba will continue to be positive, but it's not up to us on our own to unite the campaign for independence. It is incumbent upon every politician so to do. And that's what Pete Wishart or Tommy Shepherd or Ian Blackford or Nicola Sturgeon or John Swinney or Keith Brown or John Nicholson should do. Stop ranting at people and calling them out for imaginary hate, and actually say, let's get every shoulder to the wheel and drive us forwards towards independence and make Scotland a better place.
That's what we've got to do, Yvonne. And as Eva's alluded to there, we have got a couple of by-elections, so anyone out there who can, there's the Glasgow area, it's up in Castlemilk, most of the Lynn ward. It's next week, I believe, the by-election. So if you've got any time between now and then, get in touch with the campaign and help. That's what we need to do.
Absolutely. I mean, I'll be coming up to Glasgow sometime in the next few days to help out. And, people who are sitting there thinking, yeah, but it's just one seat, one by-election, one council ward. I promise you this, the first Alba victory will really cut deep and send shockwaves all the way through to Holyrood and right up into Bute House. because, we've got our two heroes down in Westminster at the moment that are making all sorts of shocks. In fact, I would think that the Westminster Speaker is still being counselled after he had ejected Neil and Kenny out of the House of Commons. So these are council seats. They might seem small, but do not underestimate them. If you can at all help, if you can leaflet, if you can get votes, if you can push leaflets through the door and get people to vote for, we've got two excellent candidates in those two seats. Go onto the Yalapa website and find out how you can help, because this is the start that we need to go to the next level. You've seen what the guys have done down in Westminster. Let's see what we can do in our own backyard.
Hear, hear. So there we go, folks. Always like to end with a wee bit of housekeeping. We will be back next week. I am trying to get Homeless Scotland on to speak to them to see what we can do to help and assist them in any way, shape or form. I remember back in 2014, do you remember when we were collecting for the food banks, when we had rallies in Freedom Square, etc.? People arriving with bags of messages to help out. We've got to find ways that we can help. And I know it's tight. I know everyone's having a hard time out there, but, many a mickle makes a muckle, and every wee bit we do helps and helps our people. And that's what it's all about. It's about helping our people. Ladies, I thank you. Phil's obviously never made it. I should maybe phone round bars and Seoul, see if I've got someone lying in the corner. And to Colette, I hope, it's not too bad. Your foot's okay, Colette, and we'll get you on here very, very soon. And for the rest of you, please, take care.
Through a Scottish Prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy. Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish Prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.